Welcome to Beast Origin. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. The first thing to come back wasn't a thought, it was a taste. A dead chemical flavor on the back of my tongue, like licking a battery that had been forgotten for a century. Then came thickled, a deep cellular chill. My eyelids were fused shut with a sticky residue. I fought them open, grit by grit, and the world bloomed into a painful white. A woman's face swam into focus above me. She was backlit by a light panel, giving her a halo she hadn't earned. Her features were sharp, intelligent, framed B, dark hair pulled back in a severe functional knot. There was a professional calm in her eyes, but he could see the cracks in it. A high-frequency exhaustion vibrated just beneath the surface, the kind you see in an engineer during the final week of a Death March product launch. She was running on fumes. An asset then, a valuable one, but manageable. "Mr. Ford," she said. Her voice was steady but quiet, like she was afraid a loud noise might shatter me. "Damon, can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my throat was a desert. All that came out was a dry, rasping crackle. I was lying in what felt like a shallow, contoured basin, slick with a cool, odorless gel. Wires, fine as hair, were being retracted from my arms and temples by automated silver arms. A corporate job high-end. My last transaction had been a good one, at least. "Don't try to speak just yet," the woman said, her eyes fixed on a transparent data slate that hovered beside her head, projecting a cascade off my own vital signs in glowing, blue script. "Your name is Damon Ford. You were placed in cryopreservation in the year 2024. The date, today." She paused then. I saw a flash in her composure, a micro-tremor in her hand as she steadied the slate. It was the first sign of a crack in her pitch. "The date today is May 4th, 2222. The numbers didn't land with an emotional thud. They landed like a bad earnings report. 198 years, an entire portfolio of assets gone, a network of contacts, all dust. My lawyers, my brokers, my offshore accounts, all erased by the simple, brutal accumulation of time. It was an inconvenience of a colossal, almost beautiful scale. She must have seen the calculation in my eyes, not the shock she was expecting. She leaned closer, forcing a softer, more rehearsed tone. "My name is Dr. Rachel Linwood. I'm the chief biologist of Sanctuary 1. You are safe. You are home. Home, a word people use to sell you something you don't need. Sanctuary 1. I managed to rasp the words, feeling alien in my mouth. My own voice sounded younger than I remembered. "The benefits package of being biologically 37 forever. The last bastion of human civilization," she said. The line delivered with practiced gravity. "The world you knew. It fell, not with a bang, but a long, slow collapse. War, ecological failure, disease, the old story. By the time it was over, the air itself was toxic. Most of humanity was. Some survived on the surface," she continued, her eyes drifting towards a thick, armored viewport on the far wall. "But the toxicity changed them. They are modified, twisted by the world that killed their ancestors. We, the pure, have survived down here in sealed, self-sustaining environments like this one." I catalogued the terms. Sanctuary, a holding company. Modified, a rival product line, likely defective. Pure, the branding for her own faction. It was all just a sales pitch dressed up in the language of survival. "For generations, we've been losing ground," Rachel said, her voice finally cracking with something genuine. The exhaustion I'd spotted earlier bled into raw, undisguised desperation. "Our gene pool is too shallow. We're suffering from genomic collapse syndrome, a progressive decay. We're dying out, Damon. We needed a reset. A clean, untainted genome from before the fall. We searched for decades, and then found you." She looked at me then, and the rehearsed calm was gone. In its place was a raw, primal hope, the kind of look a mark gets right before they signal the dotted line, convinced you're about to save their life. "Your DNA is the key," she whispered. "We call it the Salvation Project. With your genetic blueprint, we can create a serum, a cure, that can repair our damaged code, and maybe one day even reverse the mutations on the surface. You aren't just a man, Mr. Ford. You are the future of the human race." I met her eyes. The future of the human race. The ultimate startup. Capital. One vial of my own blood. My role, founder, CEO, and sole indispensable asset. And this woman, this brilliant, desperate doctor, Rachel Linwood, with the weight of the entire world crushing her. She was my new lead engineer. She would build whatever I told her to. I just had to make her believe it was her idea. I gave her my best smile, the one I saved for closing it. "Well, doctor," I said, my voice slowly returning. "It sounds like we have a lot of work to do." A week. They gave me a week to let my body remember its ways. Live. A week of tasteless nutrient paste, physical assessments, and data dumps, delivered by Rachel with the tireless efficiency of a machine. She fed me the history of the last centuries like it was a corporate prospectus, all charts and grim statistics. She was building my reality for me, brick by brick, and I let her. A good conman knows that the most effective lies are the ones the mark helps build themselves. My days were spent in a pristine white camber that they called my quarters, but felt more like a high-end holding cell. The air, recycled a million times over, had a flat, metallic quality, scrubbed clean of any scent, any life. The silence was absolute, a manufactured void. The few other pure I saw in Thecariders moved with a frictionless purpose, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed forward. It wasn't a society, it was a server farm, and these people were just data packets moving from one node to another. My takeover bid was looking more necessary by the hour. On the 8th day, Rachel came for me. "You're acclimating well," she said, her eyes on her hovering data slate. "Never own me. Your system shows minimal cryogenically. It's time you saw what we're fighting for, and what we're fighting against." We walked the corridors of Sanctuary. One were less built than they were extruded, seamless tubes of a pale pearlescent alloy that absorbed sound. We passed labs sealed behind thick panes of armored glass, where figures in white moved like ghosts tending to racks of glowing flora. Hydroponics, the company's food supply. We passed residential blocks where the doorways were all identical. Names, just unit designations, no personalization, no identity. An efficient system, I had to admit, butone without a soul, a market ripe for disruption. Finally, we reached a heavy circular door like a bank vault's. It opened, revealing a darkened chamber. The far wall wasn't a wall at all. It was a single immense sheet of armored polycrystal, a viewport looking out into hall. Rachel gestured towards it, the observatory. I stepped forward, my soft-soled boots making no sound on the grated metal floor, and I saw the surface, the world I'd once owned. It was a landscape bleached of its color, as if the sun had forgotten how to shine and left only a weak gray smear in the sky. The atmosphere itself was a visible thing, a churning oily haze, the color of a day-old bruise. Through it, I could see the skeletal remains of 21st century ambition, the jagged stumps of skyscrapers, ribs of dead highways, reaching for nothing. "The toxicity," Rachel said quietly from behind me. "It's not just in the air. It's in the soil, the water, everything." My eyes snagged on movement below. A group of figures, maybe a dozen of them, were picking their way through the ruins. The modified, they weren't the shambling monsters I'd half expected. They were alien, wiry. They flowed over the rubble in a way that wasn't quite natural. Their movements linked, coordinated, without any visible signal. It was like watching a flock of birds or a school of fish, a collective consciousness rippling through them. As I focused on them, on their eerie, silent unison, it began. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. A low-grade vibration that started in the soles of my boots and climbed the ladder of my bones. A deep internal thrumming settled in my jaw. The metallic taste from my awakening was back, sharp and acidic on my tongue. The pressure built behind my eyes, a slow, piercing headache that felt like a drill bit searching for the center of my brain. It was invasive, a signal broadcast on a frequency my body was never meant to receive. And it felt like my own skeleton was trying to harmonize with something vast and terrible. I gritted my teeth, fighting the nausea. "What is that?" I forced out. Rachel looked at me with an expression of clinical sympathy. She wasn't feeling it, not a flicker. "That's what the surface tribes call the bone song," she said, her tone perfectly level. "Anomalous low-frequency resonance. We've studied it for decades. It seems to be a quirk of their mutated biology, a form of infrasonic communication. You're one of the few pure who is sensitive to it. We believe it's a marker of your pristine nervous system." She framed it as a feature, not a bug, a brilliant bit of spin, but her explanation was too clean, too pat. This wasn't communication, it was a physical assault. More than that, it was a system. a back-channel conversation happening right in front of me, in a language that bypassed words and went straight for the nervous system. A language I was violently excluded from. The headache sharpened, the thrumming intensified. The world outside the viewport, the world they wanted me to save, was humming with a power I couldn't access, couldn't analyze, and couldn't control. A genuine unfamiliar fear began to curdle in my gut. It wasn't the fear of death. It was the terror of being irrelevant. The smartest man in the room suddenly deaf to the only conversation that mattered. The memory of that grating hum in my bones clung to me for days. It was a background radiation in my thoughts. I played the part Rachel had cast for me, the cooperative savior, the priceless relic, eager to help. I asked the right questions, nodded at her technical briefings, and spent my time learning the architecture of her lie. Every system has vulnerabilities. You just have to find the user interface. My opportunity came during what she called the deep genomic mapping. It wased beginning of the real work. She'd explained the process of translating my 21st century biology into a language her systems could use to engineer the cure. I was back in a diagnostic cradle, this only colder and more complex than the revival pod. A semi-viscous conductive fluid filled the basin around me, chilling me to the marrow. Above me, a halo of projectors cast a complex three-dimensional honeycomb of light onto my body, reading me layer by layer. The raw data streamed in front of Rachel on her hovering slate, a waterfall of glowing glyphs and cascading code. She stood beside me, absorbed, a high priestess interpreting the sacred texts. To her, this was salvation. To me, it was due diligence. My old world ran and utter trillions of transactions a second, algorithms sniffing out microsecond advantages. In Mark, I may not have understood the specific science scrolling past Rachel's face, but I knew the rhythm of clean code. I knew the smooth, uninterrupted flow of a secure data stream. For 20 minutes, I watched the waterfall, letting its cadence lull me, tracking its perfect metronomic pulse. And then I saw it. It wasn't a glitch. A glitch is messy, chaotic. This was precise. For a single imperceptible instant, the data stream stuttered, the waterfall of code froze, and a paper-thin sliver of it, a block related to my neural chemistry, I noted, was shunted sideways, vanishing through what looked like a sub-protocol before the mainstream resumed its perfect flow. It was a hiccup, a skipped beat. It was the digital equivalent of a magician palming a card. Fast, clean, and designed to be missed. I kept my voice casual. What was that? Rachel didn't look up from the slate. Her focus was absolute. What was what? The feed. It just rerouted data. Packet. She paused. Her fingers stopped moving over the holographic interface. She tilted her head, affecting a look of professional curiosity, and replayed the last 10 seconds of the scan. She froze it on the exact frame of the anomaly. Ah, that, she said, her voice a smooth blend of reassurance and condescension. It's a legacy handshake protocol. Your genome is encrypted with archaic 21st century protein markers. Our system has to build a custom decryption key in real time. Occasionally, there's a fractional deleus. The primary system queries a secondary library for the correct syntax. It's a relic of dealing with your primitive, forgive me, original coding. Nothing to worry about. Chest wiped the screen and the data began flowing again. The explanation was flawless. It was technical, logical, and it used my own antiquity as the reason for the issue. It was perfect. And that's how I knew she was lying. I've spent a lifetime building and dismantling lies. I know their anatomy. A real spontaneous explanation has rough edges. It has pauses, moments of uncertainty. Rachel's explanation had none. It was polished to a mirror sheen. It was a pre-written script, an answer she had prepared long before I ever thought to ask the question. She didn't just have an answer, she had it loaded and waiting. I let out a slow breath, the conductive gel around me suddenly feeling like quicksand, the ice-cold seed of suspicion I'd felt at the observatory. The professional perinoathite had kept me alive for decades bloomed in my chest. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her savior. The Salvation Project was a shell company, and Rachel Linwood was hiding assets from her sole investor. I wasn't the CEO of humanity's future. I was the mine, and she was quietly stripping me for parts. For the next 2 weeks, I was Themadol asset. I absorbed her briefings on genomic sequencing. I submitted to every invasive scan, and I offered thoughtful strategic input on the theoretical distribution of the serum. I learned Thello out of Sanctuary 1, the shift patterns of the security patrols they called executives, and the subtle hierarchies within the technocracy. Most importantly, I learned their network. Rachel, in her hubris, had granted me high-level clearance. She thought it would make me feel invested. It was a fatal mistake. Late during the sleep cycle, when the station ran on a skeleton crew, I sat at the terminal in my quarters, under the guise of studying Precolapse atmospheric models, a plausible bit of research for my role. I dove into the sanctuary's deep archives. I wasn't looking for science. I was looking for grit in the gears. I was looking for the unauthorized, the unexplained, the loose threads that every tidy system tries to hide. I found him in the security logs. His name wasn't there, of course. He was just a ghost, a recurring anomaly tied to a string of minor but baffling incidents, a case of pure-grade medical opiate test finishing from a locked dispensary. A private message between two council members intercepted and leaked, causing a minor political crisis. In every case, the investigation hit a dead end, concluding with a note on untraceable network breaches. The ghost had in the margins of one frustrated executive's report, a name he'd likely overheard from a black market informant. Jack, a broker, the report speculated. An independent operator who moved information and goods between the sanctuary, the surface, and the dead spaces in between. He was the system's primary vulnerability. He was my new user interface. Getting to him was a risk. The network was a panopticon, constantly watching. But a system that watches for everything is a system that can be distracted. I found a dusty corner of the network, a server hosting surveys from the first decade of the sanctuary's existence. I composed a new survey file, a meaningless string of seismic data, buried deep inside its metadata. I embedded my message, an encrypted packet that would only be visible to a user actively scanning for such things. It was a baited hook castinto, a dark ocean. The message was simple, transactional. Asset requires external consultant. Valuable consideration. Prove access. I sent the file to the archive and wiped at terminal's cache. Then I waited. For 3 days, nothing. I continued my performance with Rachel. Then on the 4th night, I woke from a shallow sleep with a certainty I couldn't explain. I went to my terminal and opened a standard dietary manifest. Tucked between the nutrient paste percentages and the vitamin supplements was a new line of text written in stark simple font. Access proven channel 17 midday one-time use. The next midday I opened the channel. It was a raw, unadorned text interface. A black screen with a single blinking cursor. There was no greeting. One typed, I require raw-tainted atmospheric and seismic data from 3 distinct surface locations. Quadrants specified in attachment. Data must be sourced independently. No sanctuary hardware. No sanctuary software. The reply was instantaneous. Difficult, high risk, expensive, payment is not an issue. A pause. I could almost feel him calculating, weighing the risk against the reward. Then the cursor blinked again. Consideration. 6 standard vials of O-negative synthetic hemoglobin. 100 grams of weapons-grade plastics. 12 EP. 7 microbatteries full. Specific practical things a man living in the gray zones would need. Things I could acquire by submitting falsified requisitions, citing experimental lab requirements for the Salvation Project. He knew exactly what I had access to. He'd done his homework. This was a predator who understood the marketplace. I felt a sliver of professional respect. Agreed. Provide delivery. Protocol. Negative. I will retrieve from a location of my choosing. You will levy the package. If it is there, you will get your data. If it is a trap, I will be gone. He was dictating the terms. Hugh was in control. Acceptable. I typed. The final reply came a second later. Transaction pending. The channel closed. The screen went blank. The waiting was a new kind of hell. It wasn't the anxious high-stakes waiting of a market on the verge of a crash. This was a dull grinding corrosion. With every passing day, the bone song grew louder in my head. What had been a headache was now a low-grade migraine. A constant abrasive pressure rethought made complex thought feel like wading through mud. The pain was a liability. It was a persistent debilitant defect in my primary asset, my mind. Rachel's so-called medical team offered solutions, analgesics that dulled my thoughts along with the pain, neural dampeners that left me and slow, useless. My data from Jack was still pending. My own plan was stalled. I was an apex predator trapped in a cage, with a high-frequency alarm ringing inside my own skull. Action was required. I opened the one-time channel to Jack again. A breach of our agreed-upon protocol. I didn't care. My previous request is on hold. New contract, immediate priority. The reply was swift, laced with digitalians. The broker sets the terms. The headaches from the surface hum. They are compromising my ability to procure your payment. Solve this problem for me. It was a confession of weakness, a move I would have never made in my old life, but this wasn't my old life. Here, a temporary vulnerability could be leveraged to secure a long-term advantage. There was a long pause. Jack was recalibrating my value, factoring in this new data point. I was a fragile client with access. He could charge more. This is not a transaction of goods. This is a transaction of flesh. Higher risk, new price, name it. To be determined. Base. The solution. The reply felt smug. A meeting. 3 days. The Rust Cathedral in Sector Gamma 7. Come alone. Wait for the bruise to thin. The bruise, the toxicness. Jack was using the language of the surface tribes. He was a chameleon, perfectly adapted to his environment. 3 days later, I was standing in a filtration alcove on the edge of their sanctuary's perimeter. A grey, featureless utility airlock that stank of ozone and recycled water. I had aerobreather mask covering the lower half of my face, and a borrowed grey poncho that did little to hide the fact that I was an alien here. When the light above the door shifted from red to amber, I pushed it open and stepped into the Rust Cathedral. It was the ruin of a pre-collapsed power plant. Four immense settling towers clawed at the grey sky, their sides weeping streaks of rust the colour of dried blood. Inside the main turbine hall, lights struggled through grime-caked skylights, hundreds of feet up, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts in the gloom. This was Jack's territory, a place of forgotten power and present decay. I didn't see him. I saw a figure emerge from the shadows, cast by a dead turbine. It wasn't Jack. This man was old, his skin the texture of cracked leather, his back stooped. He wore layers of patched hide sand-woven fibers, and he leaned on a staff of knelled pale wood. It was high size that held me. They were piercingly clear, ancient and sharp, and they missed nothing. "You are the untuned man," the old man said. His voice was a dry whisper, like stones rubbing together. My condescension rose like bile. This was Jack's solution. A witch doctor. I'd come seeking a neurosurgeon, and he'd sent me a nomadic mystic. I kept my tone transactional. "I was told you could help with a physical ailment." The old man shuffled closer. Ivor. Jack had supplied the name. He was a Mina, a healer for the tribes. He ignored my words and studied my face, his gaze analytical in a way that had nothing to do with science. "Your song is loud," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He reached out a gnarled hand and gently touched his fingertips to my jaw, right over the joint where the therming was most intense. His touch was cool, Andri, not a sickness, an imbalance. "The world sings its song, and your bones are retreeing too. Answer, but you do not know the words." He was a poet. "How utterly useless can you fix it?" Ivor's eyes never left mine. "To fix is to break something else. I can restore harmony for a time." He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt and tipped its contents into his palm. It was a dark, crumbly substance, a mash of what looked like moss and mineral dust. It smelled of damp earth and something sharp like ozone after a lightning strike. "Ashen moss," he said, anticipating my question, "grows only where the sky metal is bled into the earth, and clay from the silent, riverbeds. He mixed the compound with a few drops of water from a skin, working it into a thick grey paste, behind the ears where its skull listens. I felt a surge of indignation. I was Damon Ford. I had liquidated companies, outmaneuvered federal investigators, and built an empire on the subtle art of human weakness. Now I was standing in a ruin, about to smear mud on my head, on the advice of a superstitious primitive. But the drill bit behind my eyes was relentless, and logic dictated I see this transaction through. Hesitantly, I took a small amount of the grey paste. It was cool to the touch. I applied it to the skin behind my ears. For a second, nothing happened. Then the world fell away. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was a switch being thrown. The pressure behind my eyes vanished. The low, invasive thrum that had been the soundtrack to my new life simply stopped. My jaw unclamped. The metallic taste on my tongue was gone. My own skeleton, which had felt like a resonant instrument for an alien orchestra, was suddenly quiet. It was mine again. This silence was not peaceful. It was a profound and terrifying void. It was the sudden, deafening absence of a god I hadn't known I was hearing. In that empty moment, the truth slammed into me. This wasn't a biological quirk. It wasn't a spiritual communion. It wasn't a sickness. It was a broadcast, an external, artificial technological broadcast. I must have staggered because Eva's hand steadied my arm. I looked at him, my condescension vaporized, replaced by a searing dread. His ancient eyes were full of something that looked like pity. "Sometimes," he whispered, his voice resonating in the sudden stillness, "the quiet is the most important part of the song." The walk back to the sanctuary perimeter was a pilgrimage through a new world. The silence Iva had given me was a feld. It scrubbed the landscape clean, revealing it for what it was, a ruin, silent and dead, not humming with some secret life. I could hear the wind moving through the skeletal frames of the dead towers, a low, mournful sigh. He could hear the grit of my own boots on the rust-stained concrete. These were honest sounds. They were real. The puss effect lasted for 1 hour and 14 minutes. I timed it. I was nearing the filtrational cove, the grey featureless slab of the sanctuary wall looming in the toxic haze. When the silence broke, it didn't fade in. It snapped on an activation. The signal reasserted its dominance over me biology with the indifferent flick of a switch. The pressure slammed back into place behind my eyes. The metallic temps flooded my mouth. The deep invasive thrum vibrated up through my bones. But it was different now. Before it was unannoyance, a physical symptom. Now I felt its intelligence. It was no longer just a hum. It was a voice speaking a language I couldn't understand. And its very presence was a declaration of ownership. It was the sound of my own cage. The rest of the atmospheric data Jack had been procuring for me was now useless. A waste of assets. A man who suspects his house is bugged doesn't start by analyzing the air quality in the garden. He tears the walls apart, looking for the microphone. Back in the silence of my quarters, I sat at my terminal, the thrum in Miskel, making the glowing screen swim. Rachel's deception, her pilfering of my genetic code, was now a triviality. It was a squabble over petty cash during a hostile corporate takeover by a cosmic entity. I had been focused on seizing control of the company, only to find out the entire office building was slated for demolition by a power that didn't even know I was inside. The bone song was the key. Not a key to a cure, but a key to the prison. Who was broadcasting it and why? I opened the channel, the black screen, and its blinking cursor felt like an oracle now. I didn't wait for Jack to initiate. Priority 1, new contract. Previous transaction void. The reply was almost instant. The broker Isnat, accustomed to his clients dictating terms. The terms have changed because the nature of the product has changed. He no longer required environmental data. I required the point of origin for the anomalous low-frequency resonance. Theban song, find the broadcaster. The cursor blinked once per second. A slow, mocking heartbeat. Jack was thinking he was a creature of pure pragmatism, and I had just handed him a piece of information that radically altered his entire understanding of the world. He was connecting the dots. My debilitating headaches, my desperate need for a modified mystic, my sudden obsessive pivot. He knew this wasn't about a cure anymore. This was bigger, more dangerous, more profitable. Finally, the cursor moved. This is not data retrieval. This is an intelligence operation against an unknown, possibly non-human actor. The risk is incalculable. The price will reflect that. This was the moment, the point of no return. I had to offer him something he couldn't refuse, something that made tangling with a potential god worth his while. Price, complete source code, and hardware schematics for Sanctuary 1's water reclamation and atmospheric filtration systems are typed. The codes were life. The ability to poison the Sanctuary's water or shut down its airwas. The ultimate leverage. It was the key to the kingdom, and I was giving it away to a ghost for a chance to identify me jailer. The pause this time was shorter. It was the sound of a predatoricogenzing, the scent of blood. Consideration accepted. This is no longer a simple transaction. This is Project Rosetta. I will require an advance. The primary filtration algorithms 24 hours from now on. We communicate only when I initiate. Expect my next transmission when I have something to sell. The channel went dead. The screen was black. Project Rosetta. He'd given our madness a name. The hum in my bones seemed to intensify, a low, mocking laugh. I had just sold out the last bastion of humanity, trading their lives for a single terrifying answer. It was the most honest transaction I'd made in 198 years. The silence was a drug, and I was an addict. I'd bartered my way into 2 more pouches of fours, ash and moss. Trading away medical supplies I was sure Rachel would eventually notice were missing. Each application was a dose of fresh sanity. For an hour, sometimes 2 if I was lucky, the monstrous hum in me bones would cease, and I could think. I could plot. In those quiet interludes, I felt like Damon Ford again, a predator, a strategist. But when their signal inevitably snapped back on, the return was more brutal every time. Thistulence made the noise unbearable. It was the sound of my prison bars vibrating, reminding me they were austere. The waiting stretched into weeks. My performance for Rachel was becoming. She saw my distraction, my frayed nerves, but she misread the cause. She attributed it to cryolag, tough psychological stress of my role. She prescribed sedatives, which I palmed and later destroyed. Her misdiagnosis was my only advantage. She was trying to treat a symptom while I was hunting for the disease. Then, during a mid-cycle, when the sanctuary was at its quietest, my terminal dark and dormant, flickered to life. The black screen in the blinking cursor appeared.